Hey there, athletes. Coach John Ferry here from Team Wilpers. Excited as always to welcome you to the Week 4 athlete briefing for our Summer Run Challenge. Per usual, we're going to start with a quick Week 3 review. So we started the week with that threshold run. So we're extending a little bit of time and zone. Hopefully, people are starting to feel a little bit more comfortable, more confident, both finding that pace and then holding that pace for a sustained period of time. And a little bit of teaser for things to come in the second half. Those intervals are going to do nothing but get a little bit longer and a little bit longer. Let's keep practicing that. That was our threshold run. Our key run number 2, our VO2 max run. So all 2-minute intervals is our base this week. So we're saying goodbye to those 30-second, to those 1-minute intervals. We're going for the longer sustained efforts. I remember Coach Carly mentioning at one point, those VO2 max intervals and that VO2 max work really is the tool in your runner's toolkit, which helps you run faster, harder, longer, and races of all race distances. So hope keep up the good work on those VO2 max intervals. And then our key run number 3 here, our endurance run. So we're working on aerobic health. We're working on getting more endurance. So it's the energy zones we're focusing on here, but hopefully it also is nice, easy, fun run. So enjoy this one. So we're coming up close to the halfway point. I'm sure everyone noticed there's an unloading week coming up here. So a halfway point through this challenge, also kind of known as where motivation, the early motivation that you had in week 1 and 2 starts to wane a little bit. So it's a great reminder to keep going into the portal, keep checking the box that you did the workout, and keep chasing that 100% completion percentage. Hopefully it keeps you a little bit accountable, something to go after, something to target, as motivation tends to inevitably slip a little bit right around this part. Let's keep checking that box. So now to our week 4 workout. So when we come into these unloading weeks, we don't need to talk about each individual workout. Instead, I'm going to talk about the scope of the week and why we're doing what we're doing. So for training, we want to create specific adaptations. So we've been working on adaptations at lactic threshold. We've been working at adaptations on improving your VO2 max. And at a certain point, we can't continue to go back to the well and back to the well and back to the well. We're going to start seeing diminishing returns if we did that. So we take these step back weeks here, and there are quite a few reasons to do so. So this is part of the training process. We have both loading and we have unloading. And so we've been for 3 weeks layering on, doing the loading part. Now we're coming to this unloading week. So in our unloading weeks, we reduce both volume and intensity. So things are going to be a little bit shorter, going to be much more low key in terms of their energy zone targets. Hopefully also provide a little bit of a mental break, because the mental focus it takes to maintain these VO2 max intervals, to know the structure, build timers, be focused on specific paces. Those are things that are mentally taxing. So hopefully in this week here, you get a little bit of a mental break as well. But this also allows your body a chance to recover from the previous 3 weeks. It allows us time to spend training aerobically, which is the biggest energy zone for most race distances of people participating in this challenge. And hopefully we'll set the stage for the second half of the challenge, where you can come in fresh and rested and take on what will be a much more challenging training block. I always like to share that when I have athletes that are just nailing their training, they are super excited when we're coming into these unloading weeks. It is their treat after 3 hard weeks of training. So the people that I have that are a little bit reticent to take it tend to be, sometimes things got pushed off, not as consistent, etc. And then all of a sudden they feel guilty to back down and drop off. So if you've been training hard, you should be excited for a little bit of a pullback here in the week to come. And a final note of this, I want you to take this deload or unload here seriously. So this is not a week to go hard elsewhere, to do new strength training, to do hard cycling or major hikes. This is not an opportunity to go and put energy and focus into a different sport or area of athletic pursuit. It was a time to pull back across the scope of all of your training. Once again, get ready to tackle a bigger block here in 3 weeks. So take this upcoming week very seriously and have some fun with it as well. So we're gonna jump straight into some questions that come up with the group. There were a lot of questions today, so we're gonna jump right in there. The first question here was, I have a question about running the workouts on the tread versus running the tread outside. With the warmer weather, I love doing my runs on the Jersey Shore boardwalk. Lovely down there. Flat and fast. With the tread, you dial in your pace and your splits. You do the workout exactly as prescribed. Do you have any advice on how to hit your pace designated in the workouts? My first run of the week turned into a VO2 max run without me realizing it. Okay, so very easy to do, to kind of overshoot those paces. So the first tip is not particularly satisfying, but it's about as good as it gets, which is you have to keep practicing. The more often you do it, the more time you spend at the pace. Keep going back to the well, the easier it's going to be to find that pace, to hold that pace, and recognize what it is. So initially, it absolutely is going to be more challenging. It's going to take more focus. You're going to mess up. You're going to have to keep trying in order to get it better and better. So there are certainly some tips that go along with that hopefully will help a bit more. So it's super common to overshoot the pace target, to think about you need to accelerate to a faster pace, that pace being threshold, per general definition, still an endurance pace that you can sustain for quite a long period of time. So when you jump into that set, you tend to go a little bit fast, wanting to get up to pace. There's also a lag on almost every GPS watch, so it's not just going to snap in. So despite the fact you are running faster, that might take a little bit to catch up with you. So what I would say as a kind of a general statement, especially in something like a threshold workout, but even in the VO2 max workouts, is don't be afraid of starting a little bit slowly. If you all of a sudden get to the end of that first set and realize you missed pace by a few seconds, not that big of a deal. Just come into the second interval and try to increase your effort a little bit. At a certain point, the best way to run these workouts is going to be kind of effort-based. Once you kind of find that baseline and get relatively close. So, kind of in the example I was using, if you were a few seconds short on your first interval, just try to increase your effort level just a little bit on the second interval. Did that get you closer? Maybe. Did it get you too far? In which case you can just try to reduce that effort down a little bit. So we have very specific pace targets down to the second. The amount of runners that can hit a pace target down to the second is incredibly small. So certainly allow yourself a little bit of a buffer of 5 to 10 seconds on each side would still leave you very accurate going after those pace targets, especially if you're getting used to it outside. So I've used the term before, sometimes we're painting with a wide brush, and in these scenarios, it doesn't have to always be super pinpoint. Allow yourself a little bit of a grace period, and it hopefully will make your life a little bit happier going after those specific pace targets. And just remember that going into these workouts, it's probably a little bit better to miss and be a little bit slow on the first interval and be able to finish the workout running faster and harder and stronger, as opposed to overdoing it early and then having to back off the pace in the workout because it was too hard early on. So I'd rather you start a little bit more low key and pick it up as time goes on, which is not past to kind of come into it easy. But if you're trying to find your pace and find it outdoors and find you're consistently overshooting your paces, just try to come into it a little bit slow. Think of it as kind of an intro or a bit of a progression into that first interval. So our next question here was, I'll be transitioning to the intermediate marathon plan after the summer challenge. So would I be better to switch to the difficult level, which I did this week, to have longer runs, or will the moderate be enough, and the moderate being our baseline, be enough to be prepared to jump into the intermediate marathon training on July 28th? And so naturally, it depends. Everyone's favorite answer, it depends. So are you ready for a little bit more volume now? That's really the big difference between the baseline and the slightly more difficult option is there's a little bit more volume across the scope of the week. Some of the intervals, sometimes there's a little bit more in terms of an extra rep, extra minute or so here and there. It's not a huge difference. Mostly greater volume across the scope of the week. So are you ready for that volume? Because if you are, okay. And if you're not, then you always have to kind of meet yourself where you are now. So if it's going to be a big step up, no matter what the goal you have in the future, you have to kind of make sure you're ready for that step up. So be thoughtful about that. What also depends a lot is when is the marathon? Do you have 20 plus weeks from the end of this challenge? In which case, you might not need to worry too much about a volume accumulation quite yet, because you've got quite a runway still. Or is it 12, 14 weeks, something like that, where when you come off of this challenge, it's going to be a relatively tight timeline, in which case you absolutely want to be adding miles currently. So I tend to like somewhere between 18 and 20 or even 24 weeks for some marathon plans. So if it starts to get a little bit less than that, you need to be looking at your volume accumulation, especially of the long run, sooner rather than later. And so once again, overall, I don't think it's a huge difference between our baseline and the slightly more difficult, well, a little bit more volume, a little bit more time in zone sometimes. So if you feel prepared for it, I would encourage people to take that jump up to the slightly more difficult setting. Next question here was, is there any sort of a retest during the challenge or just at the end? I'm doing this challenge coming back from injury and a significant amount of time not being able to work out at all. I feel a significant improvement in my fitness, wondering if I should fit in a retest after the unload week, or is it better to stay the course, test at the end? Do you think my target paces were pretty accurate in the beginning, but they're starting to feel easier now? So this is a very specific scenario, but I think it actually will apply to a lot of people here. So there's not a planned mid-challenge retest. That being said, I've kind of said in the past, and I'll share again, if for some reason you felt like the early test, your initial 20-minute test, either didn't go well or didn't accurately assign paces for you, coming into the top of week 5, probably replacing the first week workout of week 5 with a retest is an option. It's kind of a specific thing if you're feeling unhappy with your paces, which happens. However, in this particular scenario, if you're talking about being a person coming back from injury, the fact that you're simply running week to week and feeling strong and feeling good is a victory in itself. So if I were sitting right here in the middle of the challenge, I probably wouldn't be thinking about a retest right now. I'd be thinking about trying to continue the challenge feeling really strong, get another 4 or 5 weeks of training, and counting next week, and then coming into that test at the end of week 8, probably a little bit more prepared. I think it's also, for anyone considering a retest, very important to remember that the second half of the challenge will be more difficult than the first half. So the intervals get a little bit longer, the volume of each week's get a little bit bigger, so the actual workout structure itself is going to add difficulty to the workout. So you don't necessarily need to also add a faster pace in addition to that to make things feel better. So in particular, if I was coming back from an injury or had an athlete coming back from an injury, I think I would probably push that thing off and test at the end of week 8. General running question here. It said, I try to avoid running in high traffic stoplight areas, but sometimes they're along my route. If I have to stop and wait, what should I do? Jog in place, high knees, butt kicks, burpees, dodge traffic, or appreciate the break? So I'm sure many people have this issue. Certainly I'm no stranger to this, being a New York City resident. And so you mentioned the best thing, which is to try to plan your routes to kind of avoid these high traffic areas where you're going to hit a lot of stoplights. Inevitably, they're going to be in the routes somewhere. What I like to do personally, and I have this option, I know how to do it for myself in my own city here, is I will use those sections to be in warm-ups and cool-downs, times in which I'm not particularly worried about maintaining an exact pace. And it doesn't bother me too much if I need to take a little bit of a 30-second rest in there and then continue on. As best as possible, you want to try to keep these sections out of your main sets. It's very, very hard to try to maintain intervals, to try to focus on pace if you're also trying to be wary of traffic, be mindful of stoplights, stop signs, etc. So as best as possible, you want to keep those out of that main set. Either way, you're going to want to make that break as quick as possible and then get back into the body of your workout. In terms of what you do there, and whether it's stand still, run in place, gently stretch, that's kind of a personal preference. I'm more, I don't love to run in place. Kind of feels like some wasted footfalls to me. However, if it helps you maintain a steady heart rate, if it helps you feel like you're able to resume running more quickly afterwards, then absolutely. Certainly an opportunity to work out any sort of tight spots or hot spots if you need to hit a quick stretch, if you have a 30-second break. But once again, the best thing you can do, kind of take the quick break and then get as quickly as possible back into your main set. Don't let it become an opportunity to take a longer rest. Next question here was, in cross training with bike or row and strength training, better to do on your off running days? Example, please, on scheduling when running at least 4 times a week. So this is a great question. It gives me a lot of opportunity to talk about multi-sport training and strength training, and my favorite soapbox item, which I'll start first, which is that cycling is not cross training. Use the same muscle groups and working in the same plane of motion. So cycling is supplemental training. Rowing's a little bit closer. You're not really moving in 3 planes of motion, so it's not incredible cross training, but it is better than cycling, which once again has its place in this world, has its place in a running plan, but supplemental training, not cross training. So that's off my soapbox now. 2, rowing and cycling have a cardiovascular element involved that has to be accounted for, which strength training hopefully does not. It's a little bit more low key. So while your heart rate might elevate a little bit while strength training, certainly not a cardiovascular effort, hopefully. So when you look at running 4 times a week, cycling, rowing, and strength training, you got a very crowded schedule all of a sudden, which is okay. There's time and a place for all those things. But in essence, what you're doing is doing multi-sport training weeks. And so when you do multi-sport training weeks, the target energy zones and the level of intensity don't all of a sudden vary dramatically sport. You don't necessarily do 3 key target workouts in each sport. You do 3 target workouts across all sports. So if you're running 4 times and you have 3 key target runs already, all you're using cycling and rowing for in this scenario is just more aerobic time, which is a great thing to do with supplemental training, a little bit more aerobic time. So if you wanted to add intensity in one of those areas, let's say obviously like the triathletes of the world, they want to be operating both in cycling, running, and swimming. They're not going to do, once again, 3 key runs, 3 key bikes, 3 key swims. Probably going to do 1 key run, 1 key bike, 1 key swim, and then a lot of aerobic work on top of that. So once again, the 3 key workouts of the week, you're just manipulating the mode a little bit. So strength, different thing. Once again, not hopefully not an aerobic element built into your strength training. So the short answer would be on non-running days, usually. However, if you're running 4 days a week, you're strength training, let's say 3 days a week, and you want a day off, you're out of days all of a sudden. So now you have to combine somewhere, and especially taking into those supplemental and cross-training activities, you're gonna have to combine a few things somewhere. So what I would do initially is I would do that your most key strength training on your non-running days. So you're coming in and doing that fresh. And then sometimes you can have supplemental strength training that's not your most key strength training. Maybe it's something a little bit more key, some mobility-based strength training. That's certainly something that you would pair probably on that 4th running day. That's not the most key. It's not neither of your key workouts. It's not your long run. It's kind of after you would do that kind of that easy run on day 4. Supplemental training, however, would be, you could go a couple different ways on that, and you would have to incorporate this with your strength training as well. So if you wanted to add your supplemental training, your cycling, your rowing, you could put it either after key runs and just get a little bit more aerobic training time. You could do it on your non-running days after your key strength training, because you never want to do as best as possible. You don't want to do aerobic work. You don't want to tire your body out and then go into your key strength training session. But if you do your key strength training later in the day and still have energy and time and want to get a little bit more aerobic work, that would be a great way to put your supplemental training in right there. But it gets a little bit crowded of how you manipulate that all around. But the most important things is to remember you want to set yourself up on the 3 key workouts of your week. So if your focus is running, your 3 key workouts should be on running. If your focus is multi-sport, you want to take a look at your whole week. You want to pick the key workouts across each medium that you're working in, assign your key workout days, and everything else becomes supplemental. It's a great way to try to continue to build without burning yourself out in the process. So hopefully that helps. And otherwise, friends, that is all here for our week 4 briefing. So I hope everyone has an amazing end of week 3. Hope you have an incredible and very fun and relaxing week 4. But remember, we're keeping the training up, so it's not a throwaway week. So stay focused, stay on task, and I will see you back here next week for week 5's briefing. Have a great week.